you phrase this word that we should look to the future of healing in regards to epigenetics. Could you go into a little bit about what you mean when you look forward to the future of healing?
Yeah, it's a great and beautiful question. There's so many places that I could go with this, but I think the first place I want to start is just thinking about what the word epigenetics is, right? So it's around the genes or the environment around the genes. And if we're thinking it forward to the future, we have to look at the code that has been basically given to us, whether it's as a remembrance. If we think about, I'm just going to kind of go straight into it. Most of the research is done with folks that have had severe trauma, Holocaust, genocide, even if you think about folks that have been in the military, um, there are big, significant things that have happened to them. And we know we can turn genes on and off, not just with food or chemicals that we're exposed to, even the way that we're eating, right? Or even our stressful lifestyles, but also trauma. And so when we think about the code that's then passed on, some of the codes that I believe are passed on, especially for families of genocide, is like, girl, run. And so, like, it's kind of embedded in that code of, hey, stranger danger. And so people might feel more of alarm or stress or those kinds of things. And it's sort of then if you have a model in their environment, like a parent or a grandparent who feels a little bit more on edge, that gets kind of primed more into things. So when we think about the forward future, and thinking about epigenetics is from the research, we know that it's not just about those tangible items of, like I said, chemicals or food. Um, it's also our emotions. And so if we have learned a background of fear or sadness or despondency or anger or resentment, whether that's inherited or a kind of a learned behavior, that can also embed in the code. We are creatures of habit. And once the body learns an actual habit, it loves to keep doing that, even if it knows that it's not good for it. And so within the book, I talk about, that forward future of, okay, if we now recognize in the research that an emotion can also change and turn on and off genes, what are we doing to ourselves, right? Like, what are we, that allows us to have more ownership in our decision making and also in our health. And so, when we also think about that future, right, for other people, we want to think about changing our thoughts. So, some folks, and I'll just share this with you, I've shared it with other people, is that growing up in my family, um, I have my parents worked really hard to raise us. And there are a number of generations back that if you think about gratitude, that was not necessarily something that was primed within my family. It wasn't part of that. So again, there's a nature and a nurture part of this when we talk about epigenetics. So it's just as important to talk about the genes, but also talk about the environment around the genes. So, in going back many generations, there wasn't this gratitude. There was a lot of hardship in my family, lots of poverty, blue babies, orphanages, war, all kinds of things. And that kind of, when I grew up, I saw other people being grateful, and I was like, wow, that must be inherited. I didn't realize that you could actually build more resilience around gratitude. And so I kind of joke around about this that some people they have like the gratitude bone of like a femur of like a T-Rex and it's huge. They have all this gratitude. And then there's other people that they have like the gratitude of like a salmon fish bone that gets stuck in your teeth. And I would say that I didn't realize that that was something that could be built within my family structure. And so, one of the things that I like to do for families, because I see a lot of families, children, adults, grandparents, all within the same family, is building some gratitude and building other pieces, realizing that the emotional body can turn on and off genes. And so, I think it's really beautiful when we think about that we actually have additional tools at this time, even in science, that will say that the emotions change the genes. I mean, that's so cool. We've known this for quite some time, but now we actually have the tangible science. So we also think about folks that have been in fight and flight for a really long time, right? So families that have been in fight and flight. And if you are from a family that's been in fight or flight or survival or fear, You don't even realize sometimes you're making the decisions that you're making. It's like, oh, I don't want to X, Y, and Z. You realize a lot of the decisions you're making are out of fear or concern, right? Out of a lack of having things. And so if you realize that you're from that kind of family of fight and flight, are you going to want to put yourself in a more fight and flight situation? You have choices. So where can you where can you pause and allow the nervous system to reset throughout the day? And that's one of the things that we know can also affect the genes. We see this with meditation, we see this with prayer, we see this with being in nature. And so these are the things that when we talk about forward and thinking about the future, knowing that these simple things of just being human again, sitting in community, music, song makes such a difference. And then there's also something when we think about healing for the future for our children, our grandchildren, is that when we realize that maybe there's something that needs to be tended within us, within our lineage, is then teaching them those skills as well. And sometimes when we have trauma set up within us, we think about something called the 3-hit theory, which is basically there maybe is a predisposition in the family, right? Of maybe there's cancer or autoimmune disease. Um, and then there's something early in their life that happens that's a really significant event. Maybe they had a parent who passed away, but then they have another thing that happens. Maybe their child is in a really bad car accident, and that's the third hit. And then that's when the genes kind of turn on or off. And so I think it's helpful for people to know that simple things of just getting back to basics can make a difference of turning on and off the genes and affecting the epigenetics so that we do have and we can think towards a forward in that future that we want to have, whether it's for ourselves or for our children and grandchildren.
Yeah, and you laid it out so well in the book with various case studies, and the way that you describe case studies were people and all the events in their life that led to where they are now, and how these events all were, one thing that built on another, and sometimes were unresolved patterns or emotions that weren't processed, and so that definitely feeds in what you're saying now, and I definitely agree with the work. When I created my everyday holistic system, we, really took it into account the mindfulness aspect and also a lot of the somatic work, the role of psychology and mind body balance when it comes to healing and self help, being able to navigate ourselves through those things because
Mm.
a lot of the answers are not from outside, they're within.
That's right.
And sometimes they're very simple tools can be done with breath work and with just straight nature connection. I always advocate people to start gardens because it's a beautiful reflection tool. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be this functional space. It can just be a space that exists because you are growing it. So it's a great metaphor. So that ties into what you're saying so well. And you do talk about fight or flight quite a bit. And fight or flight is just, it's an interesting thing that, yes, and you mentioned certain cases of people who've never been able to get out of it. And I don't know why just Maslow's hierarchy of needs just jumped into my head too.
Sure.
It's like, if you can't, there's other models that kind of assess this in a similar way that could be complementary to these things and to these theories, but also it's like also so much based in your clinical practice, which is why the book is so great because you're showing us just case after case of evidence that build
Mm.
upon each other to tackle this. So that's really great. Our next, little point here that I want to pull out, drop in the book for this conversation is how that kind of like those case studies, how can we like figure out our intergenerational trauma patterns and our other lineage imprints? How do we get them into an order of prioritization to say, aha, that was when the straw that broke the camel's back, that was the one, or maybe that was the thing I should have paid attention to, or how do I even map this out for myself or with someone else helping me?
Oh, so yeah, it's so important because a lot of times people do come in and they kind of know that there was that straw that broke the camel's back, and they've just been so much in that fight and flight that they either haven't had enough time to pause and talk about it, or there's shame or blame and they're pushing it away. But they really do want to talk about it because that's going to be such a relief and release for them. And so I can think of many mothers, and I would say it's a lot of my mothers that have children that have autism, and they know when that straw that, that broke the camel's back. And maybe it was when, they had their second child or something happened or they had a miscarriage, that kind of thing. And there's one specific case I kind of talk about with that. There's such a relief for them, as I said, and a release where then they can actually start healing. So that's one group of people that they know that there's something, they just haven't had enough time to pause, stop, and talk to someone else about it. And one of the big things in the book at the end, and also with a lot of the work that you're doing around reflection and in community, is how important it is to have someone hear your story, to really hear your story, not just like, oh yeah, that thing, and then it, like, no, really hear you and be with you in that moment. um because they feel like they can't share it with their family, whether it's their spouse, even their extended family. Again, there can be a lot of shame, and so just having someone who can hold that space and just love them unconditionally is so important in their healing process. And so whether it's folks that have been in a genocide, or if they are, if they've had, unfortunately, some significant abuse in their background, whether it's physical abuse or those kinds of things, they need to talk about it. I mean, even today, I had a patient, she's in her 60s, and she's a veteran, and she's sharing with me about the trauma that she had from the military, specifically around abuse, of men. And it's something that she had never talked about before. And I've been, seeing her for some time, but they need to talk about that. And so that's one group of people. Right. It's so suppressed. Maybe it's in the back that she even said today, I didn't realize it wasn't bothering me until the last 2 years, that my cells had held that information. I could hold it together for a really long time. And now in the last 2 years, I can't hold it together. And so I think that that's one population of people. But then there's another group of people that they know something's wrong and they feel so responsible for their family. They feel responsible for their mom, their dad, their siblings, their uncles and aunts. They're like the fixer of the family. And I like to think of them as the proxy of the family. They somehow, whether we call it emotional or energetic or spiritual, it's like they signed up and said, okay, here I go. I'll hold all this information for the family. I'm sort of you know, the proxy. And those people feel like there's a weight on their shoulders on a regular basis, and they may not know exactly what happened to their parents or their grandparents, but somehow they feel things much deeper than other people in the family. It's almost like they know things. They're very intuitive, and they can feel the things that other people don't. They also have a very tender heart, usually, and they're always thinking about other people. And so, um, yeah, we can all sort of identify with some of this to some extent, that we know someone, or if we know we are that person, or we have family members who might do that. But
I'm a little called out right now, but that's okay.
I
Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful thing to think about, that there is someone within the family, whether again it's emotional, physical, spiritual, whatever we want to call this, that has said, kind of unconsciously, okay, I'm going to hold this family together. And they feel that responsibility. And so they're the ones that are going to be clearing a lot of this, actually. And they usually, like I said, they feel things deeper. They even have more symptoms. They may even realize that drug therapy is not working for them. Like maybe they're having really bad dreams, or they can't sleep, or they're having more pain. And I see that often, that they feel it much deeper and longer, more intense. And everybody else is like, what's wrong? Like, why are you so sensitive? That's another, group of individuals that, I was really talking to within the book. I think the other, group of people that we think about would be maybe where there's some type of illness or disease that's setting up within the same system. So, like, there's a case that I share about Francis and the neurological system. And it was like everyone in her family had something neurologically, whether it was with their eyes or with it was with leg spasms or those kinds of things, because the nervous system affects our muscles. And then her mom also had something within the neurological system. So if you see within a family, it may not be the exact same diseases, but it may be symptoms that are all happening within the nervous system. That's when you want to be like, oh, I think there's something deeper going on here. And again, for those people who are not responding to typical therapy, they've been to 17 specialists. That's where we typically find, okay, this is sort of a lineage imprint. Let's go back and look at this. But some people they really know, like, they know their family history. I have, one gal who her parents were spies, and what they went through and the things that she went through. I mean, the stories that she told me about injury.
How can it not affect us?
Right, exactly. And
Which I do
so,
think that. How
yeah,
can that not have affected me? There must be a
yes.
consequence for that thing or not, and it's just that connection. I think this lineage healing is contextualized healing. It's really giving more root cause understanding of why we are the way we are and why we function the way we are, the way that we function. So it's not just turning off symptoms, it's really going under and within.
Yeah. Kind of also, if we get even more specific, more than sort of that general overview, is there are certain diseases that we can truly track that are really lineage or intergenerational and transgenerational imprints. Things like low birth weight, that's a big one. So if we have children with low birth weight, we know that within almost all the literature that we've seen over the last 20 years, 25 years, that is what we're seeing. We also see it around things like SIDS, so sudden infant death syndrome. It's basically where the serotonin kind of has had a real issue. We think it's there's supposed to be like a fail safe switch in the brain. And unfortunately, it fails. And we believe that that is also a lineage imprint. And things like ADD, ADHD, again, we kind of know that it's coming off of what mom's cortisol and her adrenals are sending as far as a message, right? Again, some of these messages are stranger danger because the body thinks it's trying to survive. Well, if her adrenal function is really low, the child's gonna mirror that off of the mother. And so that is another one. And we see that in most of our kids that have ADD, ADHD, and even our adults. And then autism is a big one. That is definitely what we have seen as a lineage imprint. And fertility, or a lot of infertility issues, even multiple miscarriages. And I think the one that's really interesting is about either missing organs or malformed organs. So if there's a hole in the heart, or if there's like a malformed kidney, like a horseshoe kidney, any of those kinds of structural things on the body, that can also be seen as a lineage imprint.
Yeah, thank you for saying all that. I think that's really helpful for a lot of people who are just like, maybe it is something from my DNA or lineage that I have to look at closer to identify that maybe there's a reason for that and what you're experiencing. I don't know why this got really interesting in my mind, but I think it's because you cover so much anatomy in this book too, and understanding our own physiology. I think didn't you mention that the endocrine system, there's like a lot of fatty tissues in there, and like there was some kind of like, in my mind it was like maybe we should focus on that system to support that system first. Is that something, did I say that correctly or perceive that correctly?
Yeah, that was, we kind of touched a little bit on this, and I think it's such an interesting question that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of, but I actually really love this question. It got me thinking in some other ways, but I think because the endocrine system is the system that houses our future, right? Because it's sperm and egg, right? And the reproductive organs, that's part of our endocrine system. Um, and our hormonal system is that if that has been primed by trauma, it affects progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, DHEA. Like you go through all of it, right? Cortisol, it affects, luteinizing hormone, and also follicular stimulating hormone. So basically, it affects our ability to one, get pregnant, and conceive, and to then carry on that message. And so I would say that that's pretty astute. I would say that yes, the endocrine system is the core organ if we're going to try to really put someone back together of really nourishing that system. Now, of course, the neurological system is intertwined, so we could call it the neuroendocrine system. And I would
Yeah.
say, right? And I would say that that's the one that I would really go after because of the nervous system really is the one that's trying to tell us if we're safe, if it's stranger danger times. And then it feeds to the endocrine system. So I would say those two together would be where if I really wanted to help someone heal in their lineage, um, I would really I usually go after that. And especially the adrenals, because that's the system of fight or flight that says, okay, girl, run. Right, or boy, run. And or hey, it's safe enough for you to sit down and eat. Oh, it's safe enough for you to breathe. Oh, it's safe enough for you to sleep. And so usually if people are not sleeping well, we want to focus on that system also. So that's a great question.
I was really inspired by your book and decided to do some, look at the adrenals and the DNA. And I discovered that the host defense chaga mushroom tincture, they put on the actual marketing for it that it's a DNA supporter. And so I'll let you know how it goes, but it also is great for adrenal health and is a great antioxidant for the adrenals. So I just wanted to share that within this episode too, that, because there's so much, all this marketing now about how
Yeah.
great these adaptogenic mushrooms are, but specifically that one was a
Mhm.
great tie-in to this conversation, and maybe seeing how it works on that level of what you just said and what you're just talking about.
And I kind
Um,
of love that you said that. If I can add one other thing to that about mushrooms as a whole, if that's okay, is, and for those of you out there in the book, I talk about things that you can do that are not like oral supplements and teas and that kind of thing. That might be for another book. But I was really trying to do low-hanging things that were either really low cost or you could do within your own house. But you bring up a really important point, which is mushrooms have the ability to really help the adrenals. Most of them do. And a lot of them also help to nourish the heart. You know, we think about reishi and that kind of thing, but a lot of them also are working with the immune system. And so when we think about lineage imprints within the immune system, that can definitely be something that can be really helpful. They not only kind of nourish some of those endocrine tissues and those core organs, but they also help with oxidation, antioxidants, if that's what you want to call it these days. I don't know. I feel like it might need a different name, but they really can be quite nourishing and help with some of the oxidative stress that happens when we are in fight or flight. So I love mushrooms and especially chaga. I really love it for a lot of my folks that have had a lot of immunological compromise or it's within the lineage and they're the ones that are getting the bronchitis every year. You know, we can actually look at, you asked a great question earlier that ties into this chaga mushroom piece is the way that I'm trained is you can look at a person's body oftentimes, probably too for you, Laura, like when you are assessing people is certain people are built in different ways, right? And so we can sometimes tell, even from homeopathy, like what kinds of remedies might be best for them. So again, for those people that are really long and lean and tall and look like maybe Abraham Lincoln or NBA ball player, um, they're really long and lean, right? And what we know in some of the research is that their body was growing so fast, but their immunological system isn't able to keep up. And so oftentimes we see they have issues around the basically the immune system or the lungs, and we want to kind of provide support for that. So that's where our mushrooms can be really helpful. I'm sorry, I just added that in, but I do love mushrooms, and since you talked about chaga, yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, me too. They're fascinating. There's so much chemistry involved there, and I think on an energetic level too. And
Yeah.
just there's so much more to go. But yeah, we could
They
do another book, another book
they
on
grow
that. That'd be
and they
fantastic.
grow in the darkest part of the forests, right? So, and even in the
Yeah.
darkest times of our lives, mushrooms are such a beautiful way of bringing back in the light.
Yes. Herbs are great. Herbs are great. And you do give great activities. At the end of each chapter, you give kind of
Mm.
a synopsis and reflection on how to break down the chapter and take some self reflection and time to assess So it's kind of like a workbook as well, which I really appreciate. And I'll give the title of a book in a couple of minutes. We have one more question. I've never thought about signaling as much as I thought about in the last couple of weeks. And you mentioned in this one part, you broke it down really well, that pharmaceutical medicine, I can't recall exactly why it was, you're talking about a particular medicine within this one chapter. But the way that you phrased it was really, really nice. So I wrote it down in my notes. And you mentioned that pharmaceutical medicine might force function and signal the wrong signals that could cause imbalances elsewhere. And I think that's a really great way of putting kind of why sometimes, not necessarily it's the wrong thing, it's just the thing that happens.
Sure.
And with pharmaceuticals, and why in this conversation of, well, how do I go holistic when I'm on pharmaceuticals, what's happening, how do these intermix? Can you elaborate a little bit on what you might mean, if that was a right way that I perceived that, and wrote
Yeah.
that down?
Yeah. So one of the things that we have to think about is that anything can sort of change, right? Like we talked about food as medicine, we've talked about even herbs as medicine, um, and even our emotions can be medicine or non-medicine. But we do know that drugs have their place. And, I am not against people using, pharmaceutical drugs. I want people to, if they're going to be on a drug, that I want it to be the right one for them. Right. And I think everyone has the same intention, is that we want whoever's in front of us to have the best healthy life that they can. And sometimes that includes pharmaceutical drugs, and sometimes it doesn't. So I teach what's called pharmacogenomics, and pharmacogenomics is a long word, but it basically means your drugs with your genes. And there is a form of science that looks at your drugs with genes that are out there to try to help us with better ways of treating people. Because unfortunately, the algorithms that exist for certain types of illnesses, it's an algorithm, it's for the general public. But we don't all break down drugs the same way. So, like, if we took 10 of us, we're all going to break down that drug differently. And it's not just because of our biological gender, it's not because of just our age, and it's not just because where we grew up. It really has to do with our genes. And so there are certain people, if you put them on a certain drug for clotting, they'll do great with it, but a third of the population isn't. And so there's things called uh, normal metabolizers of drugs. There's something called intermediate metabolizers, which means they don't quite do it the way they need to. And then there's really poor metabolizers of drugs. And then what we call, basically, it doesn't work for them at all and actually causes really bad side effects. And then there's something called rapid metabolizers. And I always like to think of it like Cookie Monster, where he's like trying to shove all the cookies in his mouth and then they're just flying out everywhere. But that causes a lot of oxidative stress. So people might feel like they are feeling really off and they might have more anxiety. And so could the poor metabolizers. So with that, we know that certain drugs for blood pressure, we need to assess that, or even psych, if we want to call it psych meds, make a big difference too. And so unfortunately, sometimes drugs are given and they have really bad side effects. And I've had, that's why they show up in my office, is that they've tried everything and all of a sudden, they end up in the hospital on the third or fourth drug that didn't work. Pancreatitis, gallbladder issues, elevated liver enzymes, or hives, rashes, or even anaphylaxis. So we have to really realize that medicine is supposed to be personalized, and that's what pharmacogenomics is trying to do. So if you have trauma in your background, or if you are a veteran, a lot of times those drugs that are given to you for anxiety, depression, those kinds of things, they're not going to work until we kind of work on some other things, whether it's the trauma or going back through lineage stuff. So again, that's why they show up in our office. But yeah, it is true. I do talk about a case in, I forget which chapter it is in, but it was
Yeah,
about
oxytocin.
it was about a young girl who was put on like Bactrim, and then also was put on oral contraceptives for her acne. And unfortunately, it led to a very severe, rare autoimmune disease. And unfortunately, she passed at age 16 in the ER, in the pediatric ER. And again, you wouldn't think that those two drugs would be a thing for most people. but for her it was. And so this is what we want to try to really recognize is that, again, it's not about saying we're against drugs or anything like that. We just want to make sure if you're on them, that you're on the right drug for you at this time. And it can change over time. So as you do work on yourself, you may find you don't need that drug anymore as you work with your providers, or you may feel that you need something different. So it is something that's very important to talk about. And I think some people they don't even know about pharmacogenomics. I mean, last week, I had to inform 3 other doctors about pharmacogenomic testing, and they had never heard of it before. So I think it'll get more popular over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm really glad you went down into that perspective of it. Because I was thinking too of this. I found that the section in the book that it's more about too, or another element I want to address was like this, um, this idea of like supplementing something when we're deficient. So many
Mm.
medications are like replacing the thing that's endogenous instead of, and then when we do that, it tends to what create some kind of signaling issue or something else happens that changes what normally has to happen. So like
Mm.
tying that into like kind of like the Chinese medicine way and like seeing how
Mhm.
like one part of the body impacts the other, that it's all this whole, not just these one little pieces being taken out and looked at further.
Yeah.
Does that feel right?
Yeah, and I think to kind of add upon that or pull some other pieces in that are really helpful related to this topic is, we can, and many times we do inherit the way in which we not just utilize the drugs, but the way in which we detoxify the drugs or detoxify anything from the system. And so some people, they need extra magnesium based upon their genetics or their lifestyle, right? Because, fast and furious lifestyles. Some people, they need more sulfur compounds in their body in order to do detoxification for a drug that they're given. So a lot of times, I would say the most common drug that I see the most side effects for, that I get concerned that is not working for the reason that they were put on it, is a drug like tamoxifen or aromatase inhibitors. So anything for a lot of breast cancer support, where they're having all the bad side effects to where they can't even get out of the car. In most cases, that drug is not working for them. And so are we over treating with this drug, right? Which means we're actually under treating because we're not actually treating, or trying to help them with the disease state. So again, and so, in many cases, that's where, we work very closely with their oncologist to be like, hey, can we get some pharmacogenomic testing done? But kind of going back to, we inherit the way in which we also detoxify. So we might need different nutrients. So some people need extra B vitamins. I mean, many people have talked about the MTHFR thing, blah, blah, blah. We all, need other nutrients and that have to be available in order for us to do basic function, even without having any type of mutations that we've inherited from maybe something like a trauma. So, like, some people who have a lot of anxiety, the reason things like B6 and magnesium work really well is because they work with certain types of enzymes that break down these chemicals like hormones or break down these catecholamines, which are our brain chemicals that can make us anxious, right? But it can also break down things like cigarette smoke if we're exposed to it or something that we ate. So we have to be doing detoxification all the time, phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. And so, like, even iron is required for us to do basic phase 1 detoxification. So, I think for even our gals and that have had, our biological females who have had like fibroids, a lot of times it has to do with phase 2 detoxification that has been inherited. And they'll say, oh, yeah, my grandmother and my mother had fibroids. And so this is another example of where the nutrients can be depleted by drug therapy. And so a lot of times my job is trying to replenish what they have because even like a drug like SSRIs that help people a lot of times for anxiety or depression, they oftentimes use up more of your electrolytes. So you're going to need more of those electrolytes. And they're like, well, I feel more woozy. Well, if we can add some more of that. So a lot of times our job is to try to make that drug work as well as it can that they've been put on, but they're oftentimes depleting that. So it's just something we have to be mindful of. And especially if we have some issues around phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification, we have to be even more specific, especially because that's been an inherited pattern often.
Thank you so much. I'll just finish with that section with this phrase. You say from your book, it says, every chemical within the body wants stability. And so when we alter one, it influences others. And that I really just meditated on that quite a bit this week, just thinking about just that kind of always that balancing and that concert happening in the body. Dr. Leah Hollon, thank you so much for coming on today and giving us so much knowledge in this last 35 minutes. And there's even more in the book, which is Unwinding the Imprints of Disease, Transforming Intergenerational and Transgenerational Trauma.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really just delightful being with you.
Yes, no, it's been a wonderful session. And you'll get a chance if you're in Richmond or in the Southeast to come see Dr. Leah Hollon at Carytown Teas this Friday from 5 to 7 p.m. She's doing a live um, just gathering, community gathering, and book signing event. So come on by for some tea if you're in Richmond. Check it out. Yeah, maybe get a copy of the book and or ask questions about the topic from tonight. And learn more from Dr. Leah and what she can do for you as in regards to this type of work and your healing. All right. Thanks, Dr. Leah. Have a good rest of your night, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.